This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I discuss true crime in the military community with the sole purpose of reminding listeners from all walks of life to remain vigilant, regardless of your profession. Because guess what? Criminals walk among us. And if you're scared by the mention of military, don't be. True crime just has to be your go-to genre. And if that's you, welcome home. If you're listening here today for the first time, welcome. But also pause this episode and go back and listen to part 1 of today's story. There, I tell you all about Alice Sebold's assault as explained in her book, Lucky, but I end the episode discussing the alleged assailant of that crime pleading that he was innocent. Well, you've probably put 2 and 2 together if you listened to part 1, and well, I am here today to bring you part 2 of this story. This time, I will tell you the story of the alleged perpetrator and his fight for justice. If you are more than just a military murder fan and you are a true Mama Margot follower, consider supporting the show by joining patreon.com/militarymurder or by subscribing to Apple Premium, where you can get access to over 50 bonus episodes for as little as $5. All right, I just wanted to plug in that right now because a lot of you are always asking me for more content. And guess what? There is more content. You just have to sign up for it. Okay, join me today as I bring you the conclusion of this story of Anthony Broadwater and Alice Sebold. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Last week, I left off with Anthony Broadwater convicted and sentenced to prison. While in prison, Tony never admitted guilt. In fact, he was quite vocal about his innocence, although I bet that there are a lot of guilty inmates who will claim their innocence until the day they die. In fact, have you ever caught someone in a bold-faced lie? Not like a little white lie, but like a no-kidding real lie. Like, bro, I have a whole ass videotape evidence of what you did, yet you have the audacity to tell me my eyes are lying to me. Yeah, it's actually sickening. And from just watching true crime shows, I know that there are a lot of inmates who basically say that they're innocent. Well, the thing about this case is that Tony did more than just claim innocence. He basically forced people to read the trial transcript. In his eyes, it would at least prove that he was convicted on grounds that were way less than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In prison, Tony was targeted as a rapist, but Tony conjured up a plan. When he was transferred from one prison to another, he made a ballsy move. Am I allowed to say ballsy? I think so. Anyway, Tony had the audacity to ask to speak to the head of the Latin Kings and the Aryan Nation, 2 highly dangerous gangs both in and out of prison. Somehow, Tony made the connection and he pled for these gang leaders to read the trial transcripts as well as the appeals. And it turned out that sometimes ballsy works in prison. Tony figured out how to save his own life. I'm not sure how many times Tony was transferred from prison to prison, but at one point he was transferred to Attica, a notoriously violent prison in New York, and there he read parts of the transcript out loud to his cell block, Now, can you imagine this? I mean, it's not like they can escape and get him to stop reading. Kind of reminds me of my kids while we are all in the car. I'm like, please stop. Anyway, in Attica, Tony tried his best to get folks to listen. But listen, Tony was no fool. So because he wasn't sure how the other inmates would take it, Tony armed himself with shanks made from the lids of tuna fish cans and he hid them in his socks, just in case. To Tony's surprise and relief, some of the other inmates came up to him saying, "You shouldn't be in prison, man." So that means that they were actually reading the transcripts. Tony worked hard to improve himself while he was in prison. He got his GED and he studied the law so that he could attempt to get his case reopened. He saved $1,000 from his VA disability payments and what little income he received from a janitorial job that he had in prison. He sent that money that he had saved to Johnny Cochran. No kidding, the lawyer who got O.J. Simpson acquitted. But the money was promptly returned because Johnny didn't take post-conviction cases. While Tony was serving his sentence, Alice Sebold was trying to heal from her attack. In all of this, we have to remember that Alice was a victim. She was brutally raped and sodomized by a stranger. While she was living in Manhattan, she wrote an article for the Times titled "Speaking the Unspeakable." And in that article, Alice described how she wasn't believed even by her own father. You see, Alice's father was a professor who worked with young people, but he told her that he didn't understand how she was raped if, quote, she didn't want to be, end quote. What? But listen, Alice went on to describe in the article written 8 years after her attack that she could still see and smell the tunnel that she was raped in. Alice suffered from terrible post-traumatic stress, and in the 1980s, there was little to no help for rape victims and for their mental health. And remember, PTSD wasn't a diagnosis that was given to rape victims. After Alice's article was published, she was invited to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. In that episode, she talked about the very difficult subject of rape. When asked why she agreed to appear, Alice told Oprah, "The reason I came today is I think the most important thing we are doing today is telling the story of individual rape victims. That's the first step in getting over all of this." Alice went on to describe how her case was put on the shelf until she saw Tony on the street in Syracuse months after her attack. Oprah asked several questions about how Alice recognized him, and she also talked about Tony's demeanor toward her. Now, I didn't tell you this earlier, but listen, when Alice spotted Tony on Marshall Street, she thought that he was talking to her. Remember when Tony said, "Hey, don't I know you?" Well, it turns out Tony hadn't even noticed Alice. He was actually talking to Officer Clapper, who was like in the vicinity of where Alice was walking, and he didn't address Alice at all. Alice had assumed that Tony was talking to her when she heard him say, "Hey, don't I know you from somewhere?" And it's crazy to think all these decades later that if Tony hadn't said anything to the cop that day, Alice might not have even noticed him. A few years after her article was published in the Times, Alice learned that her article had been quoted in a book on psychology about PTSD in rape cases. PTSD wasn't an official diagnosis until 1980, and it was mainly attributed to veterans who had served in war. Alice dove into reading firsthand accounts of Vietnam veterans, and that was when she finally understood why she felt the way she did. She had been permanently scarred mentally by what had happened to her. In 1990, Anthony Broadwater was finally granted his first parole hearing before the board. In all the years he had been locked up, Tony never stopped proclaiming his innocence. He told the commissions that it hurt him to be convicted of a crime like that. Tony told them instead of being behind bars, he could have been working and saving money all those years. Instead, he had been incarcerated. But listen, the parole board didn't believe in his innocence plea, and they promptly denied his parole. It would be 2 years before he would face the board again. He had attended sex offender counseling, hoping that it would help his chances at parole. When asked what they talked about in counseling, given that Tony claimed he was innocent, he answered, "Well, sir, the crime was done. I was punished for it. I must live with that." Back and forth, Tony tried to explain that he was a convicted rapist, but wasn't a rapist. The board's commissioner told him that he was, quote, vacillating as to whether or not you committed the crime. They can't treat you unless you first come to the threshold of acknowledgement of guilt, end quote. And with that statement, Tony's parole was denied again. And it was denied for the sole reason that Tony wasn't acknowledging his guilt. Another 2 years and another parole board. It was now 1994. I would assume he met the parole board in 1996 as well, but in the article that I read, it only talked about the first 3 and then 1998. So, in 1998, Tony was serving his time at the Mid-State Correctional Facility in Utica, New York. He was told that he would meet the parole board again, but Tony turned down that opportunity. He told the jail administration that he understood from his experience with previous parole boards that he would never be granted parole unless he accepted blame for Alice's rape. And guess what? He would never do that because according to him, he did not rape her. He was going to stick to his principles and ride it out for the next 9 years until he fulfilled the maximum sentence. Well, that all changed a few months later when a corrections officer came to Tony's cell and told him, "Pack your stuff, you're going home." Of course, Tony didn't believe this guy and told the officer to leave him alone. Nevertheless, Tony gathered up his legal documents and a few of his possessions, thinking that he was just being transferred to yet another prison. They had some paperwork for Tony to sign, but it wasn't about a transfer. Upon further examination, the paperwork was about a conditional release, which was granted by a committee that took into consideration a prisoner's record during their time behind bars. You see, Tony's record spoke for itself. So despite Tony not admitting guilt, they released him, conditionally, of course. By that point, Anthony Broadwater had been incarcerated for 16 years and 7 months. Upon walking through the last gate between him and the free world, Tony did what he didn't think he would ever do. He told the New Yorker, quote, "When the last gate buzzed open, Lord have mercy. You don't think you will do it, but I did what everyone does. I knelt down and I kissed that ground. I said, quote, Lord, I'm free, and I'm going to stay free for the rest of my life," end quote. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
Anthony Broadwater was born in Syracuse, New York, and he had 5 brothers. They lived for a time near Syracuse University where his father worked as a janitor, but Tony rarely went on campus because it was considered off limits to young Black men. When Tony was 5, he and one of his brothers discovered their mom deceased in the living room. Sadly, she had passed away from pneumonia. This left the 6 boys to be raised with just a father, which must not have been the easiest task. And they were boys, so they did get in trouble here and there. But Tony was never accused of any serious crimes. The worst thing he had ever done was steal something from a locker at school. To get his energy out, Tony wrestled in high school, and he was pretty damn good. But school couldn't keep his attention, and he dropped out at the age of 17. After meeting a Marine recruiter, Tony was quickly on his way to boot camp. But Tony's Marine Corps career was short-lived because 18 months later, Tony was diagnosed with a cyst on his wrist and was medically discharged and received disability for the condition. By this point, his father was ill with stomach cancer, and he moved back home to Syracuse where he worked installing phones for a telecom company. Everything was normal, regular, peaceful, until 1981, when his life was forever changed after Alice thought she recognized him on Marshall Avenue. To make matters worse, Tony's father passed away shortly after he was arrested for rape, and he was not allowed to see his father one last time. So let's fast forward to Tony when he was released from prison. He was in his late 30s. About a year after his release from prison, Tony was set up with a woman named Elizabeth through one of his cousins. Tony wanted to be in a relationship with this woman, but he wanted her to know the truth about his past. Tony gave Elizabeth all of the trial transcripts to read. She spent all night reading them, and the following day she told Tony that she believed in his innocence. They became a couple and worked jobs that they could do together, like janitorial work, roofing, and factory work. And Tony insisted on working night shifts because, according to him, he felt that it would always provide him with a strong alibi during what he referred to as the witching hour. And the witching hour, according to him, was when most violent crimes took place, which was at night. Tony specifically chose jobs where he had to clock in and clock out, and he wanted jobs that had surveillance cameras that could prove he was there the entire time. At one point, because he was a registered sex offender, a police officer came to his door and questioned him about the murder of a young woman that occurred in Syracuse. They didn't pursue him as a suspect because he was on camera at work at the time she was killed. But it still made Tony leery of even working with women because he was terrified that if he even looked at them, they might misinterpret his glance. This man was literally living his life on eggshells. Tony and Elizabeth eventually got married, but Tony said, "No way, we are never having kids." He didn't want to have kids who would eventually grow up with the stigma of having a father that was a registered sex offender. Despite being a free man, Tony suffered from depression. He tried to apply for better jobs, but was denied due to his 16-year employment gap and the fact that he was a registered sex offender. Because of his veteran status, he was eligible for care from the VA Medical Center and sought treatment for his depression. But Tony couldn't tell his doctors the reason behind the depression. How could he tell the doctor that he was a convicted rapist but was innocent? They'd probably think he was lying, just like the prosecution, just like the judge, and just like the parole boards that he had faced since his first encounter with Alice Sebold in October of 1981. Tony didn't want the female doctors to be afraid of him, so he vaguely talked about injustice in the world and about his mom's death. Throughout all of this, Tony was saving money trying to hire someone to help him prove his innocence. One of the lawyers ran off with the $1,400 that Tony had scraped together to hire him. One never bothered to even try to get his sealed file. On one occasion, Tony was in a car accident and received a settlement payment of $30,000. Tony used this money to try to find a lawyer to take his case. Around 2006, Tony learned about Alice Sebold's memoir, Lucky, but he never wanted to read it himself. And around this time frame when they were working on Alice Sebold's Lovely Bones, which is a fictional story, a disbarred lawyer from Michigan turned movie producer also knew about Alice's book and was interested in adapting Lucky into a movie, planning on filming it in Toronto, Canada. The producer, who I'm just going to call Tim, his name is Timothy Musianti, well, Tim was going to front the entire production budget of 6.5 million Canadian dollars himself. Here's the kicker. After Tim read the book and then he read the film's script, he was left scratching his head. Where was the evidence that this guy was the actual perpetrator? Tim, a former attorney, started to doubt the validity of Alice's account of what happened in the book, and eventually the movie was scrapped. In mid-2010, Tim, the movie producer, who was a lawyer in his previous life, decided to take a deep dive into Tony's trial. Tim hired a retired Onondaga County Sheriff's Office detective turned PI named Dan Myers. Onondaga County is where the city of Syracuse is located. They learned that the man known in Alice's book as Gregory Madison was one and the same person as Anthony Broadwater. PI Dan Myers talked to a former Syracuse police officer who told them that he did not believe that Tony was Alice's attacker. Dan put Tony in touch with a former Army JAG named David Hammond, who in turn reached out to a friend who was also an attorney named Melissa Schwartz. Miss Schwartz's expertise was in forensics, and between the two of them, they were the dream team for Tony. As they combed through all of the files on Tony's case, one thing was glaringly obvious. The one piece of evidence that they used at trial, well, decades later, that evidence was considered junk science. I'm talking about hair evidence. Since around 2015, hair analysis has not been used in trials for the most part, unless, of course, it still has the root where they can then obtain DNA from it. This investigative duo also realized just from reading the book Lucky that Alice had been coached during the live lineup, where she then changed her ID from number 5 to number 4. And you'll remember that from part 1. Lastly, this dynamic duo realized that Tony had passed 2 polygraph tests. Now, polygraphs are not admissible at trial, but it does add to the totality of the evidence or lack thereof. And in case you're wondering why they didn't just test the DNA found in Alice's rape kit that was collected in '81, well, I have devastating news about that. Tony probably would have been exonerated in the 1990s when DNA testing was just getting started, except for the fact that the physical evidence in the case was destroyed. There was nothing to test Tony's DNA against, much less test for someone else's DNA. Mr. Hammond poignantly stated that Tony's case was a travesty, stating, quote, 40 years, yet all it took was someone to pick up the trial transcript and frankly talk to Anthony and read Lucky, end quote. Simultaneously, the current Onondaga County DA, William Fitzpatrick, had instructed his team to review cases that had used hair comparison, right? Because now it's considered junk science. So Tony's case, however, never came up during that review. After joining Mr. Hammond and Miss Schwartz, Mr. Fitzpatrick emailed Alice Sebold and asked her about her recollection of the conversations that she had written about in Lucky. He told her that what the DA told her about Henry glaring at her and Tony looking demure was improper of a DA to do. Also, let's not forget that the DA was a freaking liar because Tony and Henry didn't know each other, yet she said that they constantly used each other in lineups. Anyway, Alice answered Mr. Fitzpatrick stating that those conversations happened a long time before she had written her book, and that she wrote them as she had remembered them. Tony's post-conviction attorney team took all of the evidence that they had gathered in building an exoneration case for Tony Broadwater, and they presented it to the New York State Supreme Court, which is just a block away from where Tony had been convicted by the county DA 40 years prior. On November 22, 2001, Tony, who was now 61 years old, sat before a state Supreme Court justice with his legal team on both sides of him. Judge Gordon Cuffey listened to Mr. Fitzpatrick state, quote, "I'm not going to sully these proceedings by saying I'm sorry. That doesn't cut it. This should never have happened," end quote. Judge Cuffey agreed and announced that all charges against Anthony Broadwater were wiped clean. His conviction was overturned, and he was completely exonerated of all crimes that he was accused of.
We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV Insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV Insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
During an interview, Tony told the press that, quote, "It's a long day coming," end quote. Reflecting back on 16 years in prison and decades listed as a sex offender, Tony stated, quote, "On my two hands, I can count the people that allowed me to grace their homes and dinner, and I don't get past 10. That's very traumatic to me," end quote. He also stated, quote, "I just hope and pray that maybe Miss Sebold will come forward and say, hey, I made a grave mistake and give me an apology. I sympathize with her, but she was wrong," end quote. And eventually, Alice did just that. In a public apology released to the Associated Press, Alice wrote, quote, "First, I want to say that I am truly sorry to Anthony Broadwater, and I deeply regret what you have been through. I am sorry most of all for the fact that the life you could have led was unjustly robbed from you. And I know that no apology can change what happened to you and never will. Of the many things I wish for you, I hope most of all that you and your family will be granted the time and privacy to heal. 40 years ago, as a traumatized 18-year-old rape victim, I chose to put my faith in the American legal system. My goal in 1982 was justice, not to perpetuate injustice, and certainly not to forever and irreparably alter a young man's life by the very crime that had altered mine. I am grateful that Mr. Broadwater has finally been vindicated, but the fact remains that 40 years ago, he became another young Black man brutalized by our flawed legal system. I will forever be sorry for what was done to him. Today, American society is starting to acknowledge and address the systematic issues in our judicial system that too often means that justice for some comes at the expense of others. Unfortunately, this was not a debate or a conversation or even a whisper when I reported my rape in 1981. It has taken me these past 8 days to comprehend how this could have happened. I will continue to struggle with the role that I unwittingly played within a system that sent an innocent man to jail. I will also grapple with the fact that my rapist will, in all likelihood, never be known, may have gone on to rape other women, and certainly will never serve the time in prison that Mr. Broadwater did. Throughout my life, I have always tried to act with integrity and to speak from a place of honesty. And so I state here clearly that I will remain sorry for the rest of my life that while pursuing justice through the legal system, my own misfortune resulted in Mr. Broadwater's unfair conviction for which he has served not only 16 years behind bars, but in ways that further served to wound and stigmatize nearly a full life sentence," end quote. After the exoneration, Anthony Broadwater sued the state of New York in 2023 and reached an out-of-court settlement for $5.5 million. In a statement released through his attorney, David Hammond, Tony said, quote, "I appreciate what A.G. James has done, and I hope and pray that others in my situation can achieve the same measure of justice. We all suffer from destroyed lives," end quote. Alice Sebold released a statement through a spokesperson soon after the settlement was reached, stating, quote, "Obviously, no amount of money can erase the injustices Mr. Broadwater suffered, but the settlement now officially acknowledges them," end quote. Before this, in November of 2022, Tony filed a civil rights lawsuit against Onondaga County, the city of Syracuse, the DA at the time, and the estate of former Detective Lorenz, who died of cancer in 2017. The most recent court document I could find on this was from March 2024, in which the defendants attempted to have the case thrown out. Their motions were denied. If I hear any updates, I will be sure to let you know, eventually. In all of this, it's important to remember that Alice Sebold's rapist has never been caught, nor is it likely that he ever will be caught. And no matter the amount of money Anthony Broadwater was paid, it can never erase the years of incarceration nor the years of humiliation that he had to suffer by having to tell potential employers that he was a registered sex offender. I mean, listen, y'all, he had to make a conscious effort to avoid having children despite wanting them because of this egregious injustice. So, You're probably wondering in the back of your mind about the book Lucky, the one that named Anthony Broadwater using a pseudonym as the perpetrator in Alice's case. Well, in 2021, the book's publisher pulled the memoir from publication, stating that the author was looking at possibly revising the book. The publisher, Scribner, issued a statement stating, quote, "Following the recent exoneration of Anthony Broadwater and in consultation with the author, Scribner and Simon & Schuster will cease distribution, while Sebold and Scribner together consider how the work might be revised," end quote. In the end, Tony acknowledged that both he and Alice were victims. Tony told The New Yorker, quote, "We both went through the fire. You see movies about rape and the young lady is scrubbing herself in the shower over and over, and I'm saying to myself, damn, I feel the same way. Will it ever be gone from my memory, my mind, my thoughts? No, and it's not going to be gone for her either," end quote. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for keeping up with the show. Just a heads up that I will be on my 2-week annual tour starting in a week, so my release schedule may be altered. So please bear with me if you happen to not see an episode for the next 2 weeks, but I'm trying to pump one out before I leave. If you haven't already followed the show on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to press that little plus button. That way you never miss an episode. Shout out to my girl Margot, who researched and wrote this episode. My sources for today's episode include appellate court opinions, as well as articles from the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, Variety, Webster State University, The New Yorker, The Times, Medium, AP News, and the University of Michigan National Registry of Exonerations. Military Murder was created by Mamo Margot Productions. It is made possible by all of my listeners. Executive producers for this episode include Falcon 13, Myrtle, and Jen. The music was created by Tie Ups. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story when I'm back from my annual tour. Or before then, I don't know. Just keep listening.
Mama's working on her podcast.
I don't want to.